There's no other job in the world where you get punched in the face all day. And then at 3:30, somebody says yes to you and you go, "This is the greatest job ever." There's something frigging wrong with us. There really is, because the majority of it is failure.
Welcome to Driving Growth, the go-to-market podcast for traditional B2B businesses that are looking to build systems to create predictable revenue, in short, turning their company into a revenue factory. I am your host, Steve Whittington, and president of Roadmap, an agency that builds go-to-market systems. On today's show, George Leith, a seasoned executive and thought leader in the media and software industries with a career spanning over 3 decades. Most recently, he served as executive vice president and managing partner at Harvard Media, where he oversaw day-to-day operations and held a seat on the board of directors. During his tenure, George led significant initiatives, including the acquisition of sasktoday.ca, expanding Harvard's reach into 13 additional communities. He guided the company's transition to a digital-first business model, implementing strategic restructuring to align with contemporary media consumption trends. Prior to his role at Harvard Media, George dedicated a decade to Vendasta, a Saskatoon-based software company where he honed his expertise in digital solutions and software development. George's diverse experience across media and technology sectors positions him as a valuable guest to discuss go-to-market strategies, digital transformation, and the integration of traditional media with modern digital platforms. Well, George, welcome to the show. Excited to have you on. You have such a wealth of experience, and really driving growth is about providing strategies and tactics and techniques for traditional B2B businesses so they can learn how to leverage these techniques and scale. So we're excited to hear all your experience about how you've been building and scaling go-to-market strategies for businesses.
Well, it's great to be here, Steve. Thanks for the invite.
Awesome. So where would you like to start with your, all your years of experience? Is there a pivotal moment where you started to have an aha about how you needed to put these foundations in place? What did that look like for you? Yeah,
and it was a number of years back. If I look back over my entire sales career, I don't mind saying that I've been a salesperson my entire career, and because I learned early on from mentors that business people are salespeople. They are, whether they're selling internally or they're selling to customers, and then I started to realize that it wasn't as much of an art as it was a science.
Right.
And I'm not saying that there isn't some art to it and that there isn't performance in it where you have to present information properly, but that science component continues to grow in its value, and I find that is one of the big challenges in transforming businesses. And I believe that every business on the planet is in some sort of a transformation right now due to technological changes that are shifting. And as part of that transformation, it gives us the ability to really start to do some analysis.
Yeah, you bet. There's a great book by Clayton Christensen called Competing Against Luck. And basically it's like he kept throwing stuff against the wall until he got lucky. And he's like, surely there's got to be a better way. Surely we can measure this stuff. Surely we can figure this stuff out, right? And that's what you're talking about, is the transformation that we're going through in the business community, understanding that it's not about working harder and getting lucky. It's about actually figuring out the fundamental steps and data model that you need to be able to have an effective go-to-market. So with that said and done, how would you define a successful go-to-market system in stuff that you've done in your past?
I think the first thing is, let's look at the customer base that you have and let's figure out where you're winning and where you're losing with those customers. Let's start there, because I think the existing customer base should probably frame the ideal customer profile, or the acronym ICP. And it is really fascinating to me when you sit down, and I don't really care how big or small the organization is, how profitable or not profitable they are, that data usually is not very good. Right. And it's a cold, in the organization that I was just working with, I remember sitting with all the revenue leaders in Calgary not that long ago, about a year and a half ago, saying, who are our top 500 customers and what do we know about them? And every individual in that room, from people with 40 years experience to people with 25 years experience to people with 5 years experience, it was an interesting dinner and drinks afterwards, because we knew we had a heck of a lot of work to do to understand some very fundamental information.
So I guess what you're saying, which is the same thing I would say, is first things first, understand your customers, get that sorted out, right? And there learn what works. So if that, obviously that's the first step. I agree with that 100%. What's the next step that you see when you look at that?
Well, it was, where are we going to get the data? And the data model was broken, and not by anybody's fault. It's when you look at traditional companies where the data is actually living in binders and books, and maybe the odd email thread, or maybe some legacy system, or if they have a modern CRM, it doesn't have all the data. It isn't a single source of truth. And I think that that's the next step, is where is our information? And get ready, again, for another it's going to be a sobering discussion, because you're going to see a lot of the cracks there. Now, the good news is, and I remember hearing this line, it's not a Georgism, although there are a few of them out there, but I heard this at a conference. I wish I could remember who it was that said it. But they said, I don't need a lot of data to know my wife's mad at me.
Right.
4 letters in a text, fine. And you got a problem, right? So I think that you start small, because it can be enormously daunting. There's a very large Canadian success story in the agricultural and construction space. That's as far as I'm going to go to protect the name and the people involved. And I asked the individual how their onboarding of a CRM is working. And he kind of rolled his eyes, and he said, this is going to be a long battle. And a very successful organization. But again, they got so much information. I'm like, okay, well, just how many calls did you make last week? And where did those touch points live? Could you see the phone calls? Could you see what you and I are doing right now with a meeting where we're sharing a screen? Or could you see the email threads? Can we just put it in a spreadsheet and see how many calls we made? That would be a measurement of your revenue organization, of the efficiency of that organization. How many calls do we make? And then were they on tier A, B, or C customer? Those would be some basic places to start. And then get ready for a couple sleepless nights when you realize that all the data is living in 50 different places, and you're going to have to bring it together so that you can truly start to do some analysis.
Do you see this as this is just incredibly common, where the data model isn't clean or isn't even in place? They don't know what to measure. Because that's what I'm seeing. Are you seeing the same thing?
I think that it is a very common problem, and it's not insurmountable. But you do need to bring competency into the organization that has a level of experience, or you need to go to school. And it probably is both. You're still going to need to go to school, because the world is moving under our feet.
I mean, constant learning. That's the thing. If you're leaders or readers, you've got to be constantly learning. It's a mountain with no top. You can't stop. Otherwise it's a stream and you just fall behind, right? So we started with, okay, first things first, understand the customers, get the system of record, get the metrics that matter being measured. So let's get that in place. What would you say is the next step then?
Well, I think you have to do a performance analysis and a competency analysis of your team. Okay. And I was introduced to a model a number of years back called the 9-box. And you sit down, and it's tough, right? Because you're going to sit down, you're going to do some judging. And nobody likes to be judged. So you put together a rubric and you say, okay, of our team, who are our top performers? And then of those top performers, who is measuring leading metrics and who really is just looking at the end score in the game? And what I've found is your top performers will be measuring leading metrics. They just do it in a way that they've done it for years. So if I've been selling for 30 years and I've been enormously successful, I probably have a pretty good idea what my pipeline is. And I'm probably very focused on deal crafting and bringing deals across the line, because you don't get to be successful without some system.
So all that's happening. And really what you're talking about is you're transforming an organization, right? So what would be one of those things that have sort of tripped you up as you're doing this process?
Yeah, it actually happens more than you win.
Right.
And it's the great thing about sales. There's no other job in the world where you get punched in the face all day. And then at 3:30, somebody says yes to you and you go, this is the greatest job ever. There's something frigging wrong with us. There really is, because the majority of it is failure. So pitfalls, tech savviness. If you're going to put people into a computer that have never used a computer before, it's setting yourself up for failure off the top. And you can only take so many shots where people are like, no, we're not going to use this new technology. Even though everything points that you need it, you got to make sure that you're able to get some people to become a little bit more tech savvy. And it's got to be what's in it for them.
Yeah, I've come up against that a couple times. So like one of the biggest, as you said, the biggest pitfall is you're putting in that tech layer. So you've got to train them, you've got to show them, you've got to actually model out for them how this change is going to make them more money and make their life easier. So you're hinting on like, so a go-to-market system, a really good go-to-market system that's firing on all cylinders, has enrolled various departments across an organization. The entire organization has embraced it as this is what's going to drive our business. So it's finance, it's delivery, it's sales, marketing, all that stuff is working together. So when you think about that, being the revenue leader that you've been, and you have to enroll all those different areas, what are some of the things that you've done to get everybody all rowing in the same direction and working together?
Yeah, there's, again, not a Georgism, probably something that I'm stealing, but I'd love to give credit. I forget where I got it from. Rhythm events. So the rhythm of the cadence of communication in the organization. I'm a huge fan of all hands. I believe that weekly all hands is a really important, transparent way to communicate with new generations of business leaders that actually demand transparency. Really tough for older generations because we got all the answers. We worked really hard to get to the corner offices, but we're really bad at communicating. So that's why I like all hands. Also a celebration of our success. And then daily stand-ups with the sales teams, where just a quick check-in. And again, you got to be really careful how it's done, because it's not a daily beating. Because I don't think anybody wants to go to a job where they get beat up on a daily basis. It's more of a communication and collaboration component. Probably what happened at the water cooler or the coffee machine back in the day before we had remote work. And then a culture of accountability. And what are the leading metrics for disciplines of execution, the leading metrics that we're going to measure? And I love this analogy. I lost a bunch of weight over my life. Like for a period of my time, you probably remember me, I was not as lean as I am today. And what I used in the early days of trying to lose that weight was the scale as my lone measurement. How do you think that worked out for me? Right? And that a lot of times is what finance gives us, is the scale measurement. Right? Here's the revenue for last month, and here's where we spent the money. And it's usually, there's a lag on that thing. That's why it's called a lagging measure. And what we need to get to is leading measurements. How many calls did I make? To what type of customer? That's a really important piece, because you brought up the tiering of accounts. I didn't know if we were going to go there today. But it's like, yeah, I made 5 calls this week. Okay, with who? Well, I dropped off donuts at 5 different customers. That's not a commercial conversation. That's account management, right? So what input metrics did we put in? Or going back to my weight loss analogy, if you measure what you're putting in your body and then what you're burning out of your body, then that lag measure might get you a better outcome. Yeah. Right? So it's that rhythm event that you're going to have, the cadence of communication, and then the measurement. And then again, mistakes that I've made, please try not to measure too much stuff.
Yeah. People overmeasure for sure. I used to too. I love metrics, and I used to have like 45, 55 metrics that I'd measure on a weekly basis. And I got it down to 7 now. Right. And it really comes down to, I'll look at the other stuff from time to time, but it's like, what metric do I need that I can take action on that's going to change the course of the business to reach our goals? And that's the kind of thinking that I bring with all the clients that I chat with, is let's you want to have maybe 1 or 2 lagging metrics in your overall scorecard that you're looking at, but you want stuff that is going to, you can act on and you can influence the goals that you're trying to achieve. And that's a tough one to sort of sometimes figure out. But there really are only, there's only a handful. And if you're looking across an entire organization, there shouldn't be more than 7 to 15. Other than that, you're measuring way too much. Each department can get into a little more detail on their specifics, but the overall company really has, 7 to 15 critical numbers. This has been great. You've given a lot of great insights as to what you need to do to start by putting a go-to-market system in, where you want to look first. Understand your customers is the first foundation. I'm going to challenge you to reflect on, if you could end things with some personal leadership lessons. Tell me something like, give me a couple examples of leadership lessons that have shaped your ability to implement go-to-market systems.
I've learned something about myself over the last few years, and I always challenge people on this. Do you love winning, or are you afraid of losing? And a lot of people be like, those are the same things. And they could not be further from being the same things. And I find sometimes that I hate losing, and I have a tendency to come across very aggressively when I feel that I have the right answer, and the audience can't handle it.
Sure.
So, that's the first thing. And then what I've also found is if I take a little bit of time, my answer is actually better, and it lands better, because that first emotional response is usually the wrong one. So I don't know if a system actually tracks this, but I've written lots of emails and they never get sent. Okay. They've been adjusted and they've been honed. So that's the first thing. And then the same thing and this is another one that I learned from a very close friend and colleague of mine years back, and that is never give a presentation to the organization, whether it's big or small, without having practiced it. Okay. And that doesn't mean having a 100% script, but at least understand what the desired outcome of the conversation is going to be. And make sure that you over communicate the desired outcome. Because back to my whole thing about when you put a system in place, they're going to think that you're being Big Brother. That's not actually the outcome that you're trying to drive. What you're trying to drive is team cohesion, and you're trying to drive community-based learning, where if somebody came up with a way to position a product in the market to deal with an objection, it gets shared. And that's what a stand-up or an all-hands would allow you to do, is to build a framework or a culture where you can be collaborative. But a lot of times, based upon people's past bias, they will take whatever initiative you're trying to drive, and they will bring it into where they're from. And I've got to give credit, now I will give credit to a good friend of mine, Sandy Lohr, who has been a longtime mentor of mine. I remember seeing this webinar that she did, and it was about the 4 generations that are in business today. So the boomers, Gen X, millennials, and Gen Z. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, when I first saw it, I was like, that's super cute. That was a cute thing. And then she kept doing it. And then I started to understand that 4 generations is part of that communication and personality profile of every business on the planet right now. The younger generation is tech savvy. They're digital natives. They've used this thing from day one, and they can teach us all sorts of stuff. And then the veterans, sometimes called dinosaurs or old farts, they're not tech savvy, but yet they've got systems that work, and they're super simple because they've made their world small. You remember that analogy? And they found something that works really well, and they're great at building rapport and building trust with prospects and things like that. So, that's where the boomers could teach Gen Z some very valuable lessons. Then you got Gen X. They're just, they were the people just put some dirt on it and figure it out, and didn't wear helmets, and they were riding their motorbikes and they were kids. All the crazy stuff that we did probably would take you out today. And, they can teach some things as well about resilience and about rolling with the punches. And so, I look back at all of those items, and I think we're on the wrap up and leaving it with, you've got your ideas, and you need to be adaptable with those ideas. But then when you communicate them, you need to be communicative across 4 different generations that desire different things. And then we also need to be flexible. And that's super tough, because I know exactly what color I want everything to look, and I know how the dashboards are going to look, and I know how the stand-up's going to go, and I know how the all hands it's just going to be awesome. And they never are the way that you have that vision in your head. But if you get the desired outcome, what do you care what the color is? That's great stuff, and we always need to reflect on that stuff as leaders. So George, thank you for sharing all your insights, all your experience. Where can people, if they want to connect with you, the best place to find you is on LinkedIn. Where might that be? Yeah, LinkedIn is a great spot. I'm also a huge fan of the X platform, but LinkedIn is the best place to get a hold of me. And, Steve, always admired the work that you're doing. And I think that the systems that you've been building out Whenever I read your content, I'm just like, wow, okay, it's validating at the same time as inspiring.
Well, that was an action-packed session with George going through the foundations needed to create a predictable revenue system, a go-to-market system. And if you are interested in some of the things that he said and wanting to learn how to do it yourself, we have a toolkit for you. So go to weareroadmap.com/podcast and download the toolkit, which will give you go-to-market motions and mathematical metrics and talk about the data model that you need to put in place to determine the metrics that matter so you can start implementing your own go-to-market system that's based in data. I am your host, Steve Whittington. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share with friends. I will be back in 2 weeks.